Podcast, the Pan-Africanist podcast dedicated to uniting the global African community. My name is Maurice Gwaku-Makisa, and I will be the host of today's podcast. It is my honor to be here today with the CEO and co-founder of Ugali Media, Hamid Ibrahim. This is one of the leading animation media companies in the entire continent of Africa. They're well known notably for the partnership, one-of-a-kind partnership with Disney Animation Studios for the creation of the animated series Iwaju that is based in a futuristic Lagos, Nigeria, that I encourage you all to go and watch on Disney Plus or any other streaming platform. Hamid, Akwaba, Karibu, welcome. It really is a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you.
Asante. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Of Africa for the Africans.
Je ne vois pas pourquoi nous ne chercherions pas ce qui nous unit au lieu de chercher ce qui nous divise.
La lutte continua.
What is needed? Togetherness. Unity.
How about we get right into things? Our audience does not know you very well, and we'd love to give you this opportunity to tell us about yourself. You know, you're CEO and co-founder, but before that, there's a whole story that got you to where you are. So let's start at the beginning and give you the space that you need. Give our audience an introduction to you and your journey to getting you to where you are today.
Okay, do you want, how long of a version do you want? It's a very interesting
we have time.
Up and down story. We have time. Okay,
time.
I'll run through. Nowadays, the way I frame the story is from the beginning bit. I started off, I saw you with a Kenyan flag on your hand. So I was born in Uganda, but I spent my first 9 years in Kenya. So naongea Swahili, right?
Wow.
So I'm from Kenya. And that's almost the origins of me loving animation was through that. So it was one day I was in Kenya and I was asleep and I think I woke up. Now when I woke up, there was Lion King playing on the TV. Now they speak some Swahili in Lion King. Now, obviously, as a kid growing up in Kenya, you never hear Swahili in any of the cartoons or any media, pretty much in general.
Hakuna
Right? From the news or something.
Rafiki, these are the things you used to hear.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. You know exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
So from that, the first time I was like, wait, they can't be speaking Swahili. I couldn't believe it. And then after that first time of me not believing it, the second thing comes around now where I'm like, oh my God, they're actually speaking Swahili. So I fall in love with it. And that's actually the moment that made me really, really fall in love with animation was Lion King. And that's the thing that inspired me to love animation. Now that's animation side. From the art side, it was, you know, the Mona Lisa. There was an advert. You know how adverts, usually they have nothing to do with the product a lot of the times.
Yeah.
That was one of those situations, but a happy ending at the end of it. So it was an advert. It was a water bottle advert. I've tried to find it till today. I still fail to find it. But pretty much it goes through different things. It's like this, much more than just that. Then it goes Mona Lisa, much more than just art. And for some reason, that really captivated me. And I did research on Leonardo da Vinci on our internet in the 1990s, where our Wikipedia page takes you like 10 minutes to load up. So I did my research on Da Vinci. And his life was very interesting. And he became almost my first idol in terms of somebody I looked up to. I never looked up to many people, but his life was so captivating. And his balance between art and science, you can see that a lot in me today. So a lot of what I model myself by is almost based off Da Vinci's philosophy in a lot of places. Obviously, you grow and you also capture some other people along the way. So those are two first in terms of origin stories of mine, in terms of the starting points, were Mona Lisa and Lion King. From there, grew up obviously in Uganda, right? So I went from Kenya around 10 years old. I came back to Uganda, went to school, usual kind of journey. If you've, I don't know, have you met many people from East Africa? I'm guessing you have because of the fact you grew up in East Africa.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in East Africa. I was in Nairobi just a few months ago. Hopefully I'll be there soon again. But I know a lot of Ugandans, great friends that are Ugandans, Kenyans and all of that. Yeah, but tell me.
Yeah, but you see how the vibe is very different between East Africa and the West.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right now, growing up my whole life in East Africa, I got about 2 weeks notice that I'm going to move to the UK. And the reason the notice was so short is because the visa I applied for was a child visa. So it was as a child joining my mom. So I had to come over to the UK before I turned 18. And that meant they noticed that. They're like, oh my God, we need to get him over here right now. They told me in like 2 weeks, hey, you're gonna be moving out of Uganda, not going to visit your mom for like a week or something. You're actually going to move there your whole life. And it was a very like if you imagine the two different cultures, you've been there, you've seen how different the culture is. And back in the day, that difference is almost exponential compared to what it is today. So from there, I came to UK.
How old were you? How old were you when you moved from Uganda to the UK?
17, about to turn 18. I moved here around I think May, and I turned 18 in July.
Wow. Okay.
I just realized the date today. I just realized it.
Yeah, we're in May.
That technically, last week would have been my anniversary in this country.
Wow. And how
it
many
never
years?
hit me.
How many years has it been?
Been here since 2011.
Wow. Okay.
So it's been some time now, isn't it? Time flies.
Yeah. Seriously.
So in terms of that shock of the cultures came over here, and one of the good things was when you come to this country, first things first, because you don't have to worry about school fees. There's less pressure from your parents in terms of what you learn. Obviously, as an African man, my mom was like, okay, you have to learn this. But because she's not there paying the school fees, there's a way you can be like, but I want to. And I made a whole PowerPoint presentation for my mom to show her why 3D and so on would be great. And I discovered that because I was just walking around in the school and I saw a course for animation and game design. Matter of fact, I was in that school last week. And from there, I picked up the course. But because remember, I came in this country with 2 weeks' notice, I didn't have an education certificate that was relevant that year. The most relevant one I had was 4 years old, which was like P7 one. Now, S4 would be the equivalent of GCSEs. So in other words, I'm like technically like 3.5 years behind in terms of the actual certification. So college-wise, I already knew I was starting from a back step or starting from a step behind everybody else around me. And that's kind of, if I say things that built my character, that's one of the things. Because one, I could see a possible dream of me doing what I wanted to do, which was working in, the dream at first was just work on any big Hollywood movie. That was a dream. That was the first dream. I could see that, but on the same end of me having that possibility of being able to work on my dream, directly on the other end, I'm literally behind everybody for certificates. So in my head, I'm worrying, right? And then obviously you come in this country, people tell you, oh, there's racism, there's this. So all those things are clouding in your mind. And then I know nobody who's done this as well. So there's literally almost no light. But there's only that one path that, oh my God, it's actually possible here. Because if you ask most people back home, they usually don't even think about people who make animations. Right today, it's a bit more prevalent. But at that time, it doesn't cross people's minds. Like if you're studying art in class, they would say you're starting to be an art teacher. That used to be the joke, right? Like that's the highest point of your career. You're an art teacher. That used to be the joke in school, right? So it never crossed anybody's mind that people are going to make animations, etc., etc.
And I have to say, just to interject there, like even for me as an African, talking to you, there's very few. Like I think I have one friend, a Kenyan guy actually, that's in the UK that does animation. But even when he told me about this, very few people, you're the only two people that I've had a chance to hear about. You know what I mean? So this is really interesting to hear your story. And when you were going through this process in school, were there many Africans in your program, or what did your program even look like?
I was only African. Unless in uni, there was another African guy. He was from South Africa, I think. White African. It's very rare you see any black people. I'm going to just leave African aside. Let's just go black, like black skin tone, right? The African guy at uni was white, but there was a white South African. So he's African, white South African. But in terms of black people in college, in the course, there was 3 of us in like the whole class. And then in uni, I think there was 4 of us. Let me see. There was about 4 of us or something like that. So it's always very few. And even you go to the workforce, it's always a small number. Like when it comes to just black people, Africans extremely rare. Like so in my working career, before I got to leadership, right, and obviously Kugali, before that, with all the films I worked on, I can't remember any other person being African. But I remember a few black people, but they are very rare.
So let's talk about like for the young people that are going to be listening to this episode, that are going to be hearing your story. You know, sometimes if like you said, if most people think that if you're doing art is only to become an art teacher, that may not seem like an attractive career path, because it might not seem like a lucrative one that you can really live abundantly and whatnot. What is is this a well compensated field? Is there a need to have more black people in those spaces? Like, give a pitch to someone that wants to then tell their parents, like, yo, this guy made it, and I can take care of you, I can take care of my kids, so on and so forth. Like, well, what is compensation like in this space, and what would you be your pitch to a young African that aspires?
My pitch would be slightly harsher. You'll be towing the line, right? Just because I'm very careful telling people like ABC, just because I'll frame it like this. If your topmost priority is financial, don't do it. Just straight up, don't do it. Because you could make money, but the satisfaction of this career is not from the money you make. That's very distinct. You can make as much money as you want, but that's, as a person who has been in this career for this long, all the people who are successful, their satisfaction is not from the money. I promise you that, right? So you have to be that kind of person. If your satisfaction is going to come from the money you make, there are some opportunities that appear, but there are way better opportunities in other places, especially if you're smart. Right? That's the best way I put it. So if you're an intelligent guy who, again, I was one of the top students in the class, which made me harder. It made it harder for people to swallow the fact I wanted to do art, because they're like, oh, those are people who usually lazy, who usually do art. There's that perception there, right? So I think the advice I would say, instead of trying to pitch your parents why it's okay for you to do it, you have to show them that you're different than most people. Because the honest truth is, in this career path, there is no room for average. So if you're just good, there's no room for you. If you're just, for example, a good writer, you're probably going to be a starving writer. And if you go to a career like a mechanic, if you're just a good mechanic, you're probably going to be okay. If you're just a good doctor, you're going to do really, really well. That's the difference. It's like there's no room for good. So it's almost like you have to prove to your parents you're going to be exceptional. Because that's the only people who tend to do well financially in this life, in terms of like in the art field in general. So the range is, it's you know, the hockey stick, right? It's like you're all the way down here most of the time. So if you're good, okay, from bad to good, your opportunities are very similar, which is very hilarious, right? You're barely seeing anything. But the moment you become exceptional, that's when that goes up. And it goes up exponentially.
Wow. Okay.
So you have to cross a certain chasm, and then you're making money, and then opportunities are coming towards you. Before you do that, you're in a difficult spot. The example I'd give is Beyonce has no problem making a project that makes $1 million. Yeah. She has to actively turn away many of those projects. Like when she goes, I want to work on this, most people are like, yes. Because she's crossed a point in that chasm where she's almost at the top area there, where pretty much anything she does, they're going to make a lot of money. And maybe if they spend a lot of money making it, they may not be able to break even. But any project Beyonce does that she spends only like $1 million on, I can guarantee you it makes more money than $1 million.
But you know, one of the things you mentioned that I think is really interesting is that you were already a good student. So you're not a bad student that's drawing and says you want to go and do art. You're a good student that also has this great skill set, right? Yes. And I've had the chance to do a lot of work in career development focused on Black people, Black students at the university level, at the undergraduate level. And I know for a fact that sometimes excelling academically does not always translate to professional success. The academic ecosystem and then building a profile that is attractive in the professional world is not always the same thing. All right. So can you please speak to, when you're in university, when you're getting to this space, how did your focus shift from excelling academically to building a strong portfolio that would then allow you to position yourself for really great positions that allow you to develop your skill sets further to get you to where you are today? Like, so if you can just continue your story, but like frame it in that way.
I would say the main thing is knowing who the end user or buyer is, whichever position you're in, right? So in college, going to uni, the main person getting you is the university. So whatever else happens around that. And remember when I told you I came in, I didn't have GCSEs, and I learned one of the biggest lessons I've learned in my life there, right? Because again, right, beyond racism and all that stuff, if you're good enough, people break rules for you. And if you can make somebody, the extreme version I give is, if you can make somebody $1 billion, they could hate Black people, but they will like you. Now, are they the best person to work with? No. But I promise you, people love themselves more than they hate people.
Yeah.
And I learned that very quickly in that time period because, again, I didn't have the qualifications in terms of GCSEs, whatever, right? I did functional skills, which is weak. Like, that's like most top unis do not take that. And I thought everybody would reject my application, university-wise, because I was lacking that. But what I did is I made sure my portfolio, from in college, I made sure I got a distinction plus in everything. That's like an A plus in every single module I did in college when I came to the country. Just to, again, my whole mind was like, oh, I'm behind everybody. I have to present something else that's going to show them that I can still do what is needed. Now, luckily, it's not like luck at that point, because I was not thinking of it from that perspective. Luckily, everything I was focusing on to deliver were the things that actually mattered. So, like, my portfolio itself was top notch. I talked to people in uni and I asked them, okay, what do they ask for you when you're doing the interview? They're like, oh, perspective drawings, these drawings, have you done this, have you done that? And I literally tailored my portfolio to match that. So they're like, oh, have you ever done? I'm like, oh, yeah, I love doing this. Look at this. This is all of it. So, like, everything they had was there. And the surprise, again, remember, I don't have the best qualifications because I just jumped countries.
Yeah.
Every single uni I applied for wanted me. Not only that, there were two special cases. This one I learned about people breaking rules for you if you're good enough. One of the cases was, I learned this was illegal later, so I don't say the name of the uni. So one of the unis invited me out for dinner.
Wow.
To talk to me, right? So that was one. I felt like a king, I'm not going to lie. So that was one, right? The other one, this one I can mention them because it's nothing illegal, Southampton Solent University. They emailed me saying they still have spot for me in the uni. This is like 6 months after I was in Hertfordshire. I went to University of Hertfordshire. 6 months after I was there, they messaged me saying they still have space for me if I wanted to switch unis.
Yeah. But what did your...
And that...
What
it really unlocked something in my mind.
What did
it's
your
like...
look like? Because you mentioned...
What was my what?
You mentioned perspective drawings and everything, right? But
yeah.
What did you... How did you even know exactly what you needed in that portfolio? And what was that journey of building your portfolio to then present it to the point where they're like, yo, we can't let go. We have to break the rules for this guy. He's too top.
That's the thing. It's very easy, but it's difficult. And I've done something similar to that 2 times now, right? The college to uni one was the first one. And then the unit to workplace one is the second one. The college to uni one, it was much, much easier because you just speak to people. Because when you go online, you can Google who is in what university. Facebook days, I think I used Facebook. I used LinkedIn a bit as well. And I Google people and I would ask questions. And people are usually very happy to answer questions. And that's one thing I learned. Like, most people don't mind helping you. Right? If a young kid right now, if I'm a bit busy, I'll always get back the messages, right? It take me longer than, let's say, when I was in uni or something like that. But if somebody message me, hey, man, I'm planning to join the uni, wanted to check with you how it is. Remember, there used to be like Facebook groups talking about how the uni is and everything like that. I'll just go there, click somebody's name. I see the course. I'm looking for somebody doing the course I wanted, which was 3D modeling animation, and ask them, hey, what did they ask for you in the interview? Right? Do you mind sending me your stuff? Let me see how your stuff looks like. And most people tend to be nice. They're like, oh, yeah, please. Yeah, it's this. Usually they ask about this. One thing that's really important, everybody will give you all the answers. That's the difference between like life and university, right? In life, there's nobody who can give you all the answers accurately because the paths are very blurred and there's no correct path. But university, it's very straightforward. It's like pretty much you know the model student they want and you can just ask around and you find out the details. So that's how I managed to do that. Now, of course, I had to have the level of hard work to achieve what I wanted to achieve, right? So first, it was from the portfolio level. And then 2, it's from the grade, which I could do, which was, remember, I got a distinction plus in every single module. So it's almost like going through the 3 years of college. Every single thing was like, if you look at my certificates, just to show it's not, I don't just have the talent of it. I don't just have the hands to draw or to do 3D modeling, etc. I was like, hey, I also have the brain for this. It's just, again, I came from a different country, different systems, and also the circles in which I came in. And it was that thing of, before I never thought people would care about that. Before I thought they'd be like, oh, you don't have this. Nah, gonna cancel it. That's what I thought was gonna happen before. But it just turned out the opposite is very, very true. You could lack everything and you have like 2 things that are important things for that person. And they'll break the rules. People bend rules for the things that are exceptional, like 100%. So that was the first step, was I just knew that if I perform above every single person who's supposed to be on my level, it gives me a big opportunity and leverage to get what I needed to get. And so the first one was the college to uni one.
And so from an art perspective, because me, I'm not an artist at all, right? So I'm trying to understand when when you mention a portfolio, is this 5 drawings? Is this 2 projects? Is this a short film? What does that look like from the university, from the high school to university stage? And then when you're then looking for job opportunities from the university to the workplace, what do they actually concretely look for in your portfolio? So that when people are listening, start being like, okay, Hamid said I have to do A, B, C, D, and they can start working down that same path.
I don't have the exact number of drawings, but I would say better fewer drawings than weaker drawings. People judge you off your best, like the chain, the weakest link is what it's judged on. That's with your portfolio as well, right? Because it breaks the illusion of where you are. Now, obviously, you have to have a good number of high quality works. But as far as I know, even me myself, as an employer, if you send me 10 images and all 10 of them are really, obviously, there's a number you get to where, like, okay, this guy can draw, right? I think 10 may be a good one. Again, depending on variety. Let's say 3 demonstrating different skills of each. Because then you're like, oh, he's done it multiple times, right? And the quality is about the same. The style is about the same. It shows consistency there. But beyond that, if you're going to add a 4th one, which you think is a good image, but it's maybe lacking in some areas, I would say don't quite put that in there. Because it just brings the quality of a portfolio down. Think of it like a law of averages. So if everything was on 100 and one thing is on 50, that's going to drag the average down. So think of it in that kind of fashion, portfolio-wise. That's what I would say. Now, the first time, I just got lucky because, again, I just did the things as they were there, and it just hit me. Afterwards, when I was reflecting, is when I learned that this is how things actually are. And I double-checked it. I told you, the first one was college to uni. Second one, the uni to college one. This was a big one here. But this one here, I actually was a bit scared. Because remember I said I've always been a good student. So I sacrificed getting a first in my degree to getting an upper second. I don't know the equivalent of that in the US or Canada. So first is like the highest degree, upper second is the one after the first, right? So you have the highest and you have the one below that. I sacrificed getting a first to do an upper second just because per my research, looking at the industry, people didn't look at your degree. And I was right. But obviously, as a student, you're not going to quite trust that. But everything pointed to that. But as a student, I was scared. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the gamble. And I was like, I'm not going to fail anything. But on this module here, which was the essay, I was like, I'm just going to pass it. And then I'm going to put all the effort into the module that was a portfolio module. And to this date, not a single person has asked me for my degree. I don't even know where it is. I saw it once. I was looking for my certificate of naturalization. That's the only time I saw it. It's somewhere inside one of the baskets there. Like, nobody has seen it. Nobody cares. Everybody else looks at portfolio experience. So that was the second one in terms of that gamble of, because there's a way you're supposed to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
And generally, if you go to uni, normally people are like, oh, the people with the highest degrees get whatever there, right? Like, that's a perception you have. But then you think about it is you're going from uni to life. All you have to do is just ask people who are in the real life situations. And everybody asked, well, like, oh, did they ask about your degree? They're like, nah, in the application form, maybe, but in the interview, never. And there's people who did different courses and they just had good portfolios and they got into the jobs. And I was like, okay, this is not going to work. This is going to work. So it's that thing of, again, knowing what the end person is going to need is a very big jump because it allows you to move creatively versus do what everybody else is doing. That's number one. And number two, in terms of my work itself, even my portfolio, let's say going from uni to work, right? Because I was starting a company called MPC. That's the only job I've applied for, by the way, outside KFC, which was rejected about those years ago. Which is hilarious. It's a very hilarious story.
What?
I have no idea. I don't know what I filled in wrong, but it's a very hilarious one, right?
Yeah. We'll make sure to get to that.
So I got rejected from KFC years ago. And the next job I applied for was MPC. That was it. I only applied to one job. And I tailored my whole third year of university. Every single thing I did was tailored to target getting a job in MPC.
And you knew in your first year of university that you wanted to be at MPC?
Third. I knew in the second year. The reason I wanted to go there was, remember I told you Lion King is the film that inspired me to fall in love with animation? I knew they were doing the production of the Lion King remake, the one with Beyonce, etc. And I wanted to work on that. And I was like, okay, let me try and focus everything towards that so I can get it. I got it. I ended up working on it. One of the highlights of my career. But literally, my whole portfolio was based on that. And even to push it further, I was not comparing myself with the people in my course in terms of my work. I was comparing myself with people in uni. I was comparing myself with people who are working there already. I was like, I need to be better than them, right? And that's another lesson I learned is you cannot be just as good or better than people around you, because by the time you look at people ahead of you, they have moved already. So you have to try and find a way to be better than people who are ahead of you already. Like if you're in university right now, don't try and be as good as me. Try and be better than me. Now, maybe you cannot beat me in a straight line speed, but there are certain angles that appear to you as a student that were not there for me. Like the world is a different world. Every single time it's different. So try and find a way to be in front of me. And by the time you get there, worst case scenario, I just catch up with you and I'm the same level as you.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the thinking behind it, right? Yeah. So there was that thing of, okay, in uni, everybody, even the lecturers were like, oh, don't do muscle simulation. Everybody tries it, it flops. I was like, nah, I'm going to do it. Now, obviously, as a backup, I worked enough, so I had the normal things. And then I did the muscle simulation for the creature I was doing. And it worked. Now, nobody had done it. Everybody who tried it apparently had failed. People in master that failed apparently. Now, because I had that in my head, I'm like, they cannot not take
simulation. A muscle simulation for like an animated character.
Exactly. So, for example, if you watch Lion King, you can see the animals all look very real. That's because it's built from the inside out as well. So everything they move, all the tendons and things like that, at least all the visible ones, the ones that affect the skin, everything is created, right? Now, in uni at that time, at least in Hertfordshire, University of Hertfordshire, everybody who tried muscle simulation, it had not worked out for them greatly.
So
mine worked out. No, obviously, people after it worked out for them as well, but mine worked out.
So I just want to say, because I want us to really get into your experience working at MPC and the different films you worked on, because I think that's particularly interesting. But I just want to say for our audience, Hamid has said some incredible things here. For the African parents listening, Hamid is not saying go and fail your classes. That is not what you should be taking away from here. There's a lot more strategy that goes beyond this, goes into this. You want to be a top performing student, but you want to also be aware of the realities of the market. You want to be keeping tabs, not only on your peers, but those that are actually in the market doing real work. And you want to be competitive with those people as well. So I'm really grateful that you shared your whole path and your stories and your tactics and strategies, Hamid, because I actually think that students that will listen to this and will drastically improve their prospects as a result of this. So now let's speak about your time at MPC. So you worked on Hollywood blockbusters such as The Lion King in 2019. You worked on Dumbo in 2019 as well. The Predator in 2018, Darkest Minds in 2018, and Doolittle in 2020. What was that like? What was it like working on Lion King? What was it like being an MPC?
Very surreal.
Yeah, speak on it.
Very surreal. So, in terms of the funny thing, people look at Iwaju and how big Iwaju is, and their heads go, they think that's where my dreams came true, or that was the biggest moment. My biggest moment dreams came true was when I worked on Lion King, the first day working on the Lion King project. Because if you think about the significance of it, right? If you ask any of your friends who grew up from back home, even right now, people I talk to, I messaged somebody from Uganda and like, oh my God, I can't believe you messaged me. You're one of those Hollywood people. Because Hollywood is so far away from people on the continent. People actually don't understand how crazy it is, right? In terms of like, if somebody from Hollywood turned up, like, you're not like a human being almost.
Yeah.
So it's a really weird part of it. When I tell them the schools I went to, they're like, you went to what school? And you're like, it's a very weird paradox for them. But just thinking about how wide that gap is. Matter of fact, I'll make a comparison for you. Me starting from where I started and ending up to work on the films I worked on. I'll use Lion King because that's the one that touched my heart. The Lion King remake. That gap is actually less believable than me starting from where I am right now and becoming the CEO of Disney. Like, that's more believable in my head than where I was to Lion King. That's the thing. It's very hard for people to grasp that just because they look at the heights of the other side and look at what this one was, but I don't remember how much was against me to get to that first one. Like, it was the gap on that was, like, I couldn't see a path.
Yeah.
Like, there was no path. They didn't make any sense. I was just going step at a time. Like, I'm like, okay, let me take this first step well. Like, that was harder to me than the other side.
Yeah.
So people ask me about it. What do you like? Your dreams came true? I'm like, no, my dreams came true a long time ago. This was my next dream. This was my dream for Africa, pretty much, right? So Lion King, first day at work, MPC first day of work was actually hilarious because I couldn't believe I was actually accepted. Because I turned up in the studio, because they do interviews in rounds. People are taking up in rounds, right? Sorry, not interviews, in terms of introductions and inductions and all that. So we were sitting down at the lobby area. Now, people are about to just walk inside, because I came in earlier, right? So people are just walking inside. They said, no, you wait. First thing that came to my head, you know what happened in my head? I was like, oh, see, I knew it wasn't true. They were just joking. They're like, no, your cohort is after, because I came way too early, right? So I sat down there, I waited. I was like, maybe it's not going to Okay, they took us upstairs. They ran us through everything. We signed more disclaimers. We started and all that stuff. They're taking us through the rules. And then they gave us the password to our computer. I go to log in. I remember I put the password in wrong. I'm like, there you go. I knew it was a prank. Like, they're going to come collect me now. Because I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Oh, my days.
Then obviously I do it like that. It worked. And I remember on the way home, right? It was just... It's a very weird contrast. There's two moments I had that weird contrast in terms of like not believing how great of a thing that happened. And then you walk outside and the world is normal. Like, I don't know what I expected, but I don't know, I expect people to be walking around with fireworks or something like that. But like, I was like, do you guys not see what crazy thing just happened? But it's very weird because it's happening to you. And most of the world is like, just minding their own business. So there was that one there in terms of the MPC one where it was so great. I remember I was smiling so much, like literally my cheeks hurt by the time I go home, and I couldn't stop smiling. Literally, I was just smiling. I could not stop smiling. So there was that experience. And then the Lion King one, I almost got hit by a car. The first day I logged into when working on Lion King, on the way back home, I was in Soho. I literally got almost hit by a taxi because I was not quite there. I literally could not believe it, right? It was just a crazy, crazy experience. Oh, yes. It was absolutely nuts.
And were you one of the...
That was like in terms of the feeling of it.
Were you one of the Africans working on the Lion King, the remake? Like, how many Africans were
I was working... I don't know, because it's a very big production. And I was rigging. So I was... You know when they say... I look at it like this, right? I know how I look at the industry. There is people who make the stories. There's leadership around it, right? There's a joint of those two. And then there's what I call the factory. That's what us, right? The people who, like the animators, the people doing all that stuff. Like, you don't know, you turn on the credits, the names in the beginning of the credits, and then the end credits, you can see there's hundreds of names. That's us. So you sit there waiting for your name. The first movie I worked on, I remember, Darkest Mind. I waited for my name for like 10 minutes almost until it appeared. And it's in a crowd of names, not by itself. There's like 20 names around it. You have to try and spot it as credits are scrolling, right? So that was entry level. Now, by the time I came to Lion King, I was a bit more senior, so my name came faster. That's a good way to judge how fast your name comes up on the credits. So that's like more the thing. It's more you're in the industry. So those Africans from the production side, I can't judge outside my team. Because again, we had different teams. Inside my team, I know I was the only one. Unless there was somebody who was like a white African, because I'm not in that thing of asking about their races or where they grew up or where they're from. Some people, like the Italians were very clear to know they were Italian. They always try to get you to drink coffee after lunch. That's a good way to the way Italian.
And what does
outside that.
What does your day-to-day look like as a production designer and working in these productions? What does, if someone wants to know a day in Hamid's life in this particular role, what does it look like?
Okay, so in MPC it was very different because that one I was not in leadership. That one I'm just one of the artists, right? So there I'm not a production designer. On that one I'm just, I think I was a rigger and then a 3D modeler, right? Rigging TD, so rigging technical director was the job title. Another one, I always come in the office early. I'll spend the first hour in the office trying to learn new stuff because there's a bunch of resources. So there's a bunch of books in the studio. So I'll spend the first hour doing that. There's always free breakfast in the office. So you can have breakfast there. When I went broke, I actually used that very, very well. And then the second part of the day, I just go down, sit down. You have tasks assigned to you. So let's say you're working on this. Let's say one day you're working on, I'll give you one, working on Mufasa's eyes or something like that, right? That's what I'm working on. And there's a production person who has a calendar with all the tasks for you already. So you may only know the one of them, or you may know what you're doing now and what you're doing next. But most of the time, they know, like, Hamid is going to do this. When he finishes that, he's going to go to that, and then that, and then that. Because it's such a big thing. It's like building a house. There are very, very many builders. but all of it has to end up exactly how the architect designed it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you are. So you get that. So the day starts, I know what I'm working on. I get onto it. Usually it's a lot of coding. So as a rigging TD, because we try and automate most of the things, so you don't do them over and over again. Now, obviously, if something that's very new, very composite, you make it, then you code it up. So it's automated for the next time you're updating, because you do a lot of updates. So anytime you make an update now, because everything else is coded, it's easier to change a few lines of code than to go and click like a million times.
Yeah.
So that was pretty much like most of it was coding. That's a lie. Most of it was fixing broken stuff. Like something is coded up, it's working today, tomorrow it's not working. That's like if I'm to go like 50% of your job as a rigger is things are broken, or the animator, the people who move the things around. The animator looks at the rig, they're like, oh, this rig is not working, and you have to make it simpler for them or something like that. That's like half your job versus building stuff. Like half the job is building stuff, the other half of the job is fixing stuff as a rigging TD. So that was pretty much my day to day. It was very, again, I call it a factory. It felt like I call it the factory of that stuff. In that you come in, you're not really making much decision. The decisions you're making are more on, hey, suggestions. You're like, hey, can we do that? And then you have to go up the chain of command. Yeah. So that's working as a rigging TD. Yeah. Now, as a production designer, for what I did in Iwaju, completely different experience. Because now you're no longer in the factory. Now, because I was creator and production designer. So again, it's my vision getting executed from the creator perspective. Production design, I'm in charge of all the visuals. So now everything that comes through all the way the chain of command, comes to me. Then I have to decide if we're going to go in that direction, if it's visual. If it's story, it will go to the director or Ziki, because that's the way we work is I handle everything visual, Ziki handles everything story. So that's how it would go. So production design is a very, very different kind of day, in that there are a lot more meetings, a lot more talking to people, a lot more reviewing things. Whereas as a person in the factory, a lot more making and waiting for reviews of your things.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And so, we're going to get a chance to get deep into what Iwaju, but I think one of the things that you had shared with us that I'd love for you to speak to is, you're working at MPC and then Malaika comes out. And this is sort of a turning point in your journey, in your perspective as to where you feel you need to be and the kind of work you feel you need to be doing. Can you please share that story and speak to that experience?
It's one of the stories I try not to say as much. We don't have very many rules with Disney. One of the big ones is don't talk badly about something else. And it's hard to do that. So I try to say this as nicely as possible these days. So at that time I was working on the Dumbo film, and the trailer of Malaika came out. Now, to me, it looked very cool. As an African, you don't see many things that excite you from the animation field. That was one thing that excited me a little bit. I showed it to my colleagues without context. I was just like, hey guys, look at this cool thing. And they all roasted it for like 2 weeks. Not only did they roast it, and everything was justifiable. It was more like, hey, look at the cloth simulation, it's stuck on his leg, they'll laugh at that. Look at that, it's that, they'll laugh at it. And everything they said made sense. I was laughing, funny enough, I was laughing with them, but inside it was killing my soul, right? Because you know how first impressions stick and last? That was like their first exposure to African visual entertainment. And it's that. And then you know what makes it worse? They go online, they search for African visual effects. Try and do that on YouTube. See what you find. You're going to get African Spider-Man, Who Killed Captain Alex.
I know African Spider-Man. I've seen African Spider-Man.
There you go. Now, I want you to think about my experience now for those 2 weeks with all those things happening. Because as you know, it's like, again, it's like you're in the trenches with these people. And in the trenches, you look for like one thing sticks as a theme of like a period of time. And this is a period of time of just like this funny stuff from Africa, right? It was hilarious. Everybody was having a good time. I'm not going to lie. But not for the reasons I wanted them to have a good time about it.
Of course.
I don't blame them, obviously, because they never said anything false. Like everything was completely true. And I know that was the moment that it really made me think, because I already started Kugali, but it was more like a side thing I was doing just to remove, because I always like to do more than one thing. I don't like always doing what I'm being told. I always want to have creative outlet. Kugali was that. I wanted to do something for back home a little bit. So I was like, I'll just do this a little bit. It's something I'll do for back home. But it wasn't as serious. But that moment completely changed me, because I was like, there's no way I'm here working on this kind of level of film. And then back home, our best efforts, like what we are known for, is a joke, literally. And that's when I say preparing for my exit from the company, if I'm to put it like that, from MPC. And also, I say looking around and trying to find better African projects and stuff like that. On top of that, I took Kugali very seriously at that point. At that point, I was like, you know what? This is super serious now. Like, this is not, it's no longer a side thing. This is more like that a motivation came into me, which was like, I'll show them. It was almost like that, that I'll show them energy.
Yeah.
That was the energy I was running off of at that point. So that really changed. It changed a lot about me at that time. Like a lot.
Yeah. And something else I found really interesting as far as your journey was, as you continue to grow in your roles, your skill sets, you're presented with more and more opportunities, right? How did you manage that crossroad decision between taking, other lucrative job offers and committing to Kugali? All right, because you have this thing that happens with Malaika. You realize Kugali has to be a serious thing, but you're also, you're one of one, as you've described by your own journey, right? So the offers are coming in. You choose to go the Kugali route. What was that period like for you?
It was very weird. Most of the offers were easy to reject because they were about the same from where I was, right? So it's the same amount of money. So I would say no. The difficult one came when I ran out of money. And I was raving, okay, this is actually funny enough. This is a funny story. Mm-hmm. If you're from Africa and I say living on rice and eggs, at least Uganda, people are like, oh, you're bowling because rice for rich people and eggs for rich people. In UK, rice and eggs is like the cheapest meal you can make up.
Yeah.
Because rice is like a pound something that can last you a week, the small pack. And then eggs, a tray of eggs is like, okay, now it's like 2 pounds something. So technically for like 7 pounds, you can survive for like a whole week with your food sorted just on rice and eggs.
Yeah.
Right? Back home, different story. That's like rich people's food. Let's put it that way, right? But just putting it in context. Actually, I'll put it in context. People in Uganda, if you're buying a chapati in Uganda, you expect it to be like between 300 to 500 shillings. I'll say 500 shillings to 1,000 if it's like high-end place, right? Chapati. In UK, one chapati would be the equivalent of about, let me see, 5 pounds would be how much? 25,000 shillings for one chapati. Now, reverse it. If you're going, that one chapati is cheaper. Sorry, that one chapati is more expensive than rice that would last you a week. So just for people in Uganda, just so they can wrap their heads around it, right? Because a lot of the time they don't believe it, but that's how way to wrap your head around it in terms of how cheap rice is here, right? So in that moment when I was in those depths, I got a job offer from a company in Germany. I remember at that time they're offering me 70,000 a year for 2 years, locked in contract, pay me upfront some of it already. And that was the largest amount of money I had seen to that time in terms of a contract for myself. Remember, my career has gone very quickly. All this stuff in MPC happened within 1 year. So I'm just in my second year out of uni. For someone in an art career, for you getting 70K a year on your second year out of uni, even people who have been experiencing that were like, they don't usually get that, right? So that was a large amount of money for me at that time. And I remember I was sitting in this decision of like, okay, I'm here suffering. I could just take that. But then I was like, what would that say about my integrity? In that the first moment when I get presented with a large sum of money, I abandoned what I said I was going to do to go to that. And that's the thing that made me go, okay, you know what? Let me continue with this journey. It's because I left MPC, I was going up, right? I was upgrading my position. I was going to make more money. And the reason I left was I was coming out to help African stories. And in my head, I just couldn't reconcile the fact that I left to help African stories. And when I'm in the middle of doing that, I get another opportunity with more money and I'm going to abandon this right away. It felt wrong. And I was like, you know what? Just integrity-wise, I cannot do that. So that one was a difficult one. It was a very hard decision. I didn't tell my mom. I told my mom years after. Matter of fact, I didn't tell her. She went out from an interview. And then we spoke about it years after. Right? Just because there's no way you could make her comprehend that. Let's put it that way, right? That I'm suffering. I'm literally suffering. I'm literally on the breaking point, right? But I was like, I'm going to continue on this journey. That one was difficult. There was one that's more recent, but I can't release more details. Funny enough, that one would make a hell of a story. But that would be in 5 years' time. I may pull this story out. Because this one is a way larger sum of money. And it's the same thing. And this one, it's not like I went from large sum of money to remaining to where I was, more like large sum of money to negative money, almost. That was a decision. Are you going to go negative money or large sum of money? And I went negative money on this one, yes. So those would be the two big ones. And it's just more on your goals and why you're doing this. My motivation was never financial. My motivation was I wanted to make real change, which thank God I managed to do with Iwaju. And if that's really your motivation, that's one way you can actually know that's actually your motivation is when money is offered to you, do you buckle on it? If you buckle on the money, it means the money was more of a motivation than you making the change.
Yeah. And so now let's get into Kugali, right? Because I think you've done a great introduction to you and your journey to this point. But first and foremost, what does Kugali mean, and what is Kugali Media's origin story?
So Kugali, it came from a word means kujali in Swahili. Swahili coming back to us again. Now, kujali means to care in Kenyan, and we just want to make up our own word. So we changed the kujali into Kugali. So that's where Kugali comes from. And as a company, all it means is high quality African storytellings. So stories that respect the past, embrace the present, and imagine a future of African stories. That's how we put it. So that's Kugali in short, right? So we work on comic books, augmented reality, animation, pretty much anything visual entertainment to do with authentic African stories. That's all we are about. That's Kugali itself. What was the second question?
How did you guys come to be? What's the origin story of Kugali?
Origin story starts first with Tolu and Ziki, because for them, they were childhood friends. They knew themselves when they were in primary school. And they always wanted to tell stories from their end. And they started a podcast going Dawa Vataku. Now, I told you my story. When they were doing that, I had my story with MPC and all that stuff. MPC and Kugali started around the same time because I was leaving uni. So I was still in uni when I was talking to the guys in Kugali. And then obviously I started doing the MPC stuff and all that. But I told them what was going to happen. So both of those started around the same period of time. So we kind of joined up because we noticed all our visions was together. And from my side, personally, I've spoken to multiple companies because I wanted to do something for back home. And I didn't want any company that wanted to limit my dreams. That's because I wanted to go far. I wanted to do bold moves. And Kugali was at least Tolu and Ziki at that time. It wasn't Kugali at that time, just transitioning to actually being called Kugali. We had no comic books or anything like that. And they were open enough to accept the bold dreams I had as well, versus trying to box themselves into what it should be. And most people were like, hey, but no, we have to do this. First, I'm like, no, we don't have to do all those things. We can just do this. It's almost like, I should give a perfect analogy. Most people I spoke to, it's almost like going in uni, like, no, you have to get that fast. Don't worry about the portfolio. You do a good portfolio too, but you have to get it fast. That's almost the comments I was hearing. But everything I saw reflected back from the world was saying the opposite. It was like, nobody cares about that, right? So that was the same thing I did with most people who I approached to come to work with, like who I wanted to work with. I remember I would have about 10 meetings a day physically. So what I would do is I would plot the meetings around London, and I would start going, like, let's say some people who you cannot move where the meetings are, right? So I get the furthest point of who that person is. Now, the people whose meetings I can move, I'd make them along the journey to go to that person's meeting place and back from that person's meeting place back home.
Wow.
So we have the immovable meeting points, and then everybody else is placed on the journey around that. So by the time I finish the meeting round, I'm back around close to the house. And as I'm going down there, every meeting I take, I'm coming close to the person versus like crossing all the way back here, right? So I'd have about like 10 meetings physically as in person a day. On Zoom, much easier. In person, different story. And I was speaking to very many people just because I knew I was going to give a lot of myself to the project. I never knew as much as I was going to give, right? But I knew it was something I wanted to do. It was not about me, and I wanted to do it right. And I knew the team would be very important. I got very lucky. The team balance between me, Tolu, and Ziki is actually absolutely perfect. It's one of the gifts we have as Kugali, is a team balance. And just, we're all different enough, but we all respect our differences enough to move forward, if that makes sense. So luckily over there. So that's pretty much the formation of Kugali. So from Tolu and Ziki end, they were also doing it. Then they went to do a podcast. From that, we came together and we made Kugali as you know it right now.
And if you had to go back to that time and whisper in Hamid's ear and be like, Hamid, listen, this thing you should do it this way instead of going this way. What would be the one piece of advice you'd give to Hamid from back then?
That's the thing. I don't think there's a piece of advice because, okay, now you have ups and downs in companies. We had a very big dip last year. Was it last year? Yeah, last year. And there were whispers about what that dip would be. But you don't tend to listen when things are going okay. I don't know. As best I can put it, money can massage problems very, very well. That's the best way I can put it, right? And I don't think there is a way you could talk to me for me to pick up that lesson without us going through the pain we went through last year because of whatever happened. Obviously, I can't release the details of that. That's part of the interesting story, funny enough. But I can't release those details. But that's the best way I can put it is I don't know if there's the most important piece of advice to give Hamid at that time. I don't think he would listen to it. I really don't.
You who knows yourself.
Like, I don't know how I would crack it, but I don't know if I would listen to it.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things too is that you joined Kugali while working at MPC at the same time. And you mentioned you needing to, be focusing on two projects at the same time. How did you balance this? Like, to others that are listening to you, to your journey, and might want to follow a similar path or start their own company, can you speak to that balancing of going to MPC and then also working at Kugali at the same time?
There was no balancing. I'm going to be completely honest. I work like a donkey. I'm married now. My wife will attest to that. She just came from the gym. And it was that thing of I would go to MPC. I would leave the house at about 7:30 in the morning, 8 in the morning, right? Go to MPC, depending how much work I was going to do before the work I needed to start. And then I'll get back home like around, I think we'd finish at 5 something. We'll go late a lot of the times. And let's say I would get back home like around 7:30 p.m., 8 p.m., sometimes 9 p.m. if we're going late. But even that, outside that, I would still put in at least 2-3 hours in Kugali work. So I'll do 1 hour in the morning. I'll do a couple of hours after. And most of my reading and stuff like that, I'll do that on the train on the way there. Like, okay, this is how I organize my tasks, just to give you an idea of how crazy I was at that time. I don't have the energy to do it now. I'm an old man now. But I had tasks specifically for specific locations. So there are tasks you can do in certain locations. There's some tasks you can only do in certain locations, right? So there's work you can only do on a computer. I'd never do work that you can do outside the computer on a computer. Like, for example, responding to emails. I would never respond to emails on the computer. I would do that on the train or like walking because I can do that on my phone. So on the computer, I'm only doing stuff that need to be on the computer. So I'd put in a to-do list for me to do work. My walking task, my on the train task. And social media, that was only when I was in the bathroom. So that was my social media thing, catching up on that, messaging people was when I was in the bath. So everything had like a location. So like all my time was taken up because I was doing two extreme things at the same time. And I don't know if I can, it's one of those weird things, right? I don't know if I can advise people to do that. But that's what I did and it worked out for me. Even right now, I've slowed down a lot, but people still say I work a lot. But to me, it looks like I've slowed down a significant amount. But most people are like, you need to rest, right? So it's I look at it from a very different perspective. Because it's simple math, right? If I do twice as much work as you and I'm working smarter than you, I'm not getting back twice the results. I'm getting like 4 times back the results on that.
No, I see. I hear.
Because time is a factor. Exponential growth is a factor. Time is a factor. It's like investing. If you start investing 10 years before me, it's not like you're not only 10 years ahead of me. You're well ahead of me. It's going to be almost impossible for me to catch up.
And compounding at the same time as well.
Exactly. It always compounds, right? That's the same thing with work. And especially knowledge work. Because the moment you get the knowledge, the results from that are very big, right? I'll give an example is, let's say, how long did it take you guys to set up your studios and the cameras and stuff? It took some time, right?
It took some time.
Now, exactly. Now imagine it took you guys a week to do that only. Yeah. Right? The amount of stuff you'd produce would not be just like that period minus a week. It will be, it's way greater than that because every single time you do it, you get better.
Yeah.
And you do it better. Right? So your most high quality thing is going to come way, way sooner than the other end. So that's how the math in my head was like, okay, even if I don't have this, I don't have all the resources, I don't have this, I have time and I can work smart. I can strategize and work smart. So that's why I worked a lot.
One of the things that you brought up earlier that I want to bring back is like everything that happened with Malaika and the reviews that your colleagues were giving of, the best quality visual effects coming out of the continent at the time. For you guys, now that you're Kugali Media and you have this African animation company, this media company, what does talent building, sourcing, and training look like for you guys, particularly in terms of training the kind of talent that you need, either on the continent or in the diaspora, to be able to build and tell the stories that you guys are looking to tell?
It's been a really weird journey. We've learned a lot of things. Again, people just joined us on the Zoom live. We've been on, we're using Google to be fair. We're using Google Meet. and we use Slack as well in the beginning. But we've been digital ever since 2017 at Kugali. So we've always been digital. Like pandemic came, we were already digital, which was good for us. Just because you can't tell Pan-African stories when you're based in one location.
Yeah,
right? We have artists from different places.
Yeah,
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So we always had that from the beginning of it, in terms of just that spread everywhere, if I'm to call it that. And I can't even remember your question anymore. I just lost track. Repeat the question.
Talent sourcing and training. So how
talent sourcing. Got it.
Yeah.
And if you're spread around Africa, a very interesting thing happens on community-based things. Like when there's very few people doing something, they always know each other, which is very interesting. Like you can't just find one artist from a country. You find one artist, they have like a few friends. So it's like that network keeps growing. And then we had the podcast in the beginning, which really, really helped us. So from all different parts of the continent. And because we're working all over the continent, we're not restricted with a lot of countries where maybe there's only 2 artists in that linear, like 5-kilometer region. We're not restricted because we're digital. So we can pull somebody from different parts and people can live in different parts. So if someone wanted to move to the village and they have decent internet there, doesn't have to be the best internet, there has to be decent internet there. We can actually work with Kugali as well. Whereas most companies, if you're based in a location, somebody is not driving 4 hours every day to come to the office. They could, but not many people are doing it. Very few people will. So you limit the number of people you work with, right? So that's step 1. Step 2, training them. I've always had the internal training mechanism. We paused last year just because of the industry went a bit weird. So we're trying to refine our legs. But we're going to come back stronger with the program. We call it Kugali Academy, which is pretty much every senior person we have. In their contract, they have a mentorship clause where they have to mentor people who are below them. Just to bring up the skills. And that's because they're working on the same project, it's very easy to do that. So that's one way we do to improve a lot of the skills. And just, again, networking, talking to many people, you get access. And again, as I said, you find one artist, you'd never find only one artist. He has like a couple of friends.
What do you feel is the gap between the animation space in the UK, in the West, compared to Africa? Like what's the gap and what do we need to do to close that gap?
Infrastructure. The infrastructure, people in the West, you guys really, really, really don't utilize your infrastructure. I would say not just in animation and art, in everything. Like people in the West, like the blessings you have are immense, but there is hardly any motivation for most people to go for them. Maybe that's why, if you can think about, I think, was it, at least in the US, one of the most successful groups are immigrants from Africa. Because it's like somebody comes in with that hunger and then they see the opportunities that are here. Because from the West's perspective, most people I meet who are from here in the industry, they think the industry is trash. And then I give them context, right? So I'll give an example right now. So UK just passed a tax break thing for anybody making a small film. That's a budget under $15 million, 15 million pounds, I think it is, right? For US, UK, the West, that's a small budget. That's a small film. Nobody expects a theater film. The highest grossing film, which made the most money in Africa, it was made for $500,000.
Wow.
And then over here on this end, small budget, indie film, 15 million. Like you're playing, like it's just the numbers are crazy if you go between the two places. And then you look at the grants that are in these countries in the West. Like there's a lot of that missing in Africa. Now in Africa, people are trying to solve it. A lot of stuff have popped up right now, which are amazing, which are actually working. So I'm really looking forward to it. Africa is going to be a very different place in the next 5 years. There's a lot of programs around which are actually doing a lot of good because people are seeing the opportunity of it, which is great. And the issue is some of them are missing the plot a bit. I had a question?
No, I was going to ask for when you talk about, you spoke about the budget for these films, right? Specifically for an animated series, how much does it cost to make an animated series? And is it profitable? You know, and when you guys think about the cost, how do you finance this cost when you get into an animated project?
Okay. So Kugali have only made one big film. Obviously, Disney rules. I can't tell you the budget. But generally, animated films, when it comes to series, they range from about, depending how long they are, will range from about 20, 25 million, all the way up to 200 million when it comes to cinema releases.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
budget. But the returns on that, people usually don't think about it, is one, it's not just financial returns, there's cultural returns, and these things stay forever.
Mm-hmm. The Lion King.
I'll give an example. Yeah, exactly. I met, if you meet, give an example, like you yourself, if you meet one of the people who worked on the original Lion King, it stays forever. It doesn't go where you're like, oh my God, he's that guy.
Yeah.
The amount of money Lion King has made, the IP of Lion King has made, I don't know how many billions it would be. Right? Yeah. It's an insane amount. And most people don't consider that just because people think of it as an A to B. They think of it, this is how I put it. People think of it like stock trading when you're doing day trading versus you're doing investing. Mm-hmm. Day trading, you put it in, you wait for the money to come out, you pull out. That's what you're doing, right? Day trading. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't do it in a day, short period of time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's why people think about the media and film and animation scape, even like anything visual entertainment, right? Mm-hmm. Where they're like, oh, you spent this amount of money on the film. You made the film from this amount of money. It didn't make that much money in the box office. People forget about it. People stop it there. They forget that you can sell it to a streamer for like another $1 million or something like that. You can do it to that for this. And then you can make this from it. People can buy that about it. And then there's this thing you can make money from it. It's a product in itself. And there are very many ways you can capitalize on it. And people don't think about that. And the more iconic something is, the more long-term capitalization you can make from it. Mm-hmm. Right? So again, big thing moving from more the day trading thing and things. So returns on it, it's hard to get your returns right away most of the time for most films. Unless you're like a big film with big backing, then you get big marketing on this. A lot of the time, which is hilarious, a lot of the time the budget of the films is exactly the same as the marketing budget.
Really? Wow.
Yes, that's the crazy thing about the industry. If you think about it, that's why when they calculate the numbers of box office, let's say if a film costs 200 million to make, this is how they usually do the numbers, right? Like if the movie made 300 million, that movie made a loss. Because the marketing budget of the 200 million movie would be over 100 million for sure. It would be, let's say if they under market it would be like 100 million. Let's say 100 million, right? So it's already at 3 million. And then on top of that, the cinemas, if it's a cinema release, they take like half of it in the best case scenario, something like that. So if a movie you spent like, let's say 200 million and then 100 million marketing and then half of it to that, technically you have to make 600 million to make your money back.
To break even.
And then from there, you're going to net profit, right? 600 million from there, you've paid everybody, right? So it's like a net zero. And you still have the asset where you can keep selling for multiple things and everything after pretty much 600 million and above that, everything else above that is now just money collecting into your wallet. That's a good way to think about it.
So when you talk about even the talent and skill set gap, a lot of it is the amount of capital that the African entertainment industry is able to allocate to the development of its stories, the visual effects and all that. We don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to throw at projects in the same way that Western animation.
We don't have the hundreds of millions anyway. Like, think about it. I'm from Uganda. The GDP of US is 21 trillion. Yeah. Guess how much the GDP of Uganda is?
It's in the billions. I'd say like
49 billion.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Right? So if you're thinking about it in terms of the amount of money floating around, when one place versus the other, it's a whole different ball game, right? So just from beginnings of that, just the math of it doesn't make sense. And then just belief behind it. Like culturally on the continent, it's almost impossible to convince somebody that you're gonna enter this field and make any money.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's examples you can show. There is me, there is that person, but every single person making money in this field on the continent is exceptional. Like the moment they leave the continent, they make way more money right away. It's really hilarious. You know when they say brain drain in the entertainment field, it's insane.
Wow.
It's almost like football. Football is actually a very good analogy for this.
Yeah.
If the players played for their own countries, bro, Africa is winning a couple of World Cups.
Yeah. Whether it's the British team, the French team, there's a range of different teams that benefit from our talent.
Exact same thing. Now, that's because, again, football-wise, sports-wise, right? Better stadiums, better training. They are more valued. Like you hear Project Mbappe, you can hear that a lot in the West.
Yeah,
And
I'm
that's the
Cameroonian.
person somebody can think about.
I feel Project Mbappe
Exactly.
even deeper. I wish I could see him in a Cameroonian jersey, but that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Exactly. So it's just the whole infrastructure is built this way. On this side, it's very young. Advantage of something being young, though, because nothing is completely negative, right? The advantage is almost every single thing you do, you're etching yourself in history.
Yeah.
Like most of the history for the Western films has been written.
Yeah. But now it's
like literally
we're
most
going
of
to
it.
talk about Iwaju in 5, 10, 20, 50 years for sure. For sure.
African history,
Yeah.
African storytelling history is being written today. That's the advantage of it not being there in bulk, right? It's like anything you do which is in any level of significance, it's history.
But
So that's a good thing there.
It's interesting. You bring up all of these realities. I mean, with a GDP of 50 million, and Uganda is a fairly large African economy, mind you. You know what I mean? If you think about African economies, Uganda is not doing too badly for themselves. So, and I think Uganda, after Nigeria, Uganda actually has one of the largest entertainment industries on the continent. That's where Spider-Man comes from. Actually, I think African Spider-Man, does come from Uganda.
It comes from Uganda, yes.
Yeah.
But I would say South Africa beats us. Let me see. Entertainment-wise, it'd be the big five economically, which is a very interesting analogy. That most of the places with the highest economics have the highest entertainment industries too. So I don't know which one follows what. I don't know if it's because when they start respecting the arts, their creativity and imagination shoots up more, or is it because they have a lot of because they are financially stable, their entertainment has space to move through. I'm not sure which one it is, but it's a direct correlation. So if you look at the richest countries, or the countries improving most in the world, you'll notice they have a very strong entertainment industry that accompanies them. So in Africa, we have the big five. We have, is it Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, Egypt, and I've forgotten the other one. I think Ghana. I can't remember, right? But there's big five, right? And all of them have a decent entertainment industry that always boosts them. And I was actually thinking about this analogy today, right? In terms of the power of the entertainment industry, right?
Yeah.
Think of this. I'm posing a question. I could be wrong. It's a thought that just came up to me today, early in the morning. If anime came from China, I think China would be the world superpower right now already.
I love that you bring that up because, I think, and a big reason is that we have limited access to capital. But when we think about our global influence, you see it with Afrobeats today. Our cultural expansion is part of our soft power and our ability to be recognized globally, So the entertainment industry, that's why the US is what it is. It's Hollywood. Everything is American. And the Japanese, like you mentioned with anime, they were able to cultivate this in the 90s and 80s. They had the second largest economy in the world after the US. So that was part of that narrative. So I agree with you 100%. 100%. That culture piece is huge. But to your point about that, I now have a question for you that I was trying to get to. You guys, when you started this off, or one of the things that I remember getting from your interviews and the documentary that people should go and watch on Disney Plus on how Iwaju was made. But you started off saying, we're going to kick Disney's ass. And that had to evolve. And you guys went on to partner with them and do this incredible project. But can you speak to how did that transition take place? And what were some of the realities you were confronted with to be like, hey, this is actually the best thing we can do right now. And this is the direction we want to go in.
It was one of the things where growth would be, say, a big thing. Because it's very hard to say you're wrong, especially when the whole world is telling you you're right. I'll give you an analogy, right? So when I say, because nobody says that statement with the mind going, I want to work for them. Matter of fact, I'd left the Hollywood industry to try and do something else on the side. So literally, it was like, in my head, I wasn't thinking I was going to end up back there, at least in that fashion. I was thinking we are going to surpass them in a way, not work with them, right? But that was the first one. And then the second one, now, the growth bit comes in from here, which was, obviously we spoke to them. They were really nice. They were a bit too nice. It was one of those. I always waited for the ball to drop. I was like, they must be lying. They can't be this nice. And they actually are that nice. So give that up to Disney, right? In terms of the Disney animation studio, the people who work for them, they are absolutely lovely. I cannot speak for all Disneys. I've only worked with one, again, in case somebody comes out. But Disney in this area is not the greatest. But I'll tell you this for much. The Walt Disney Animation Studio, the main guys in LA, amazing studio. Everybody is super nice. They are too nice for my taste, but I like the change of pace. Let's put it that way, right? They're super nice people, right?
Yeah.
And it's really hard to then, because I had the goal in my mind was, again, why I left MPC was, I'm going to show the world we can do amazing African stories. Now, I've challenged the Goliath of this because I thought they're not interested in doing African stories. That's why I challenged them. I was like, we're going to kick their asses because if they don't pay attention to this space, inevitably at some point, we're going to kick their asses. That was my brain. Now they come through. That means one, they're paying attention to the space in some way or fashion. They care, right? Which meant I was wrong already because I never thought they cared at all. And then from them caring and them reaching out to us, they reach out to us in a humble way. They didn't approach us like, hey, we are Disney. It was more like, hey, we are creatives. Let's see what you guys are about. And that was surprising, right? So if you think about it, like they had, like, nobody in Disney Disney didn't have to be like, oh, we have to work with these guys. I'll be like, who cares about them? Ignore them. But they came to us like, let's see what these guys are about. We spoke to them. And then the key thing is what we noticed was they are willing to tell the story authentically, which was something we didn't expect.
Yeah.
And I think you've watched Iwaju. Nobody can watch Iwaju and be like, these guys, they didn't. We nailed it. I'm happy about that, right? It delivered. Thank you, right? And that was the main thing there was, because we knew we could do that with them. That means we could actually deliver on the dream. Again, I had the first dream of a big Hollywood film I did with Lion King and so on. This second dream was, let me see if we can do a high quality project for Africa. And that's the only reason I was serious with Kukali was, okay, we have to show the world Africa can do something amazing. And this was like an open book to do it in the most realistic way I could have thought of at that time. I just had to swallow my pride and be like, I was wrong, and then move forward with it. But it was internally was a difficult one because in my head I was like, I know what people's sentiment of Disney was in the world. Like at least there's a big political divide in the US, in the world actually, in the Western world, the big political divide. And because that divide is so close to the middle, like Disney has almost lost half the people who usually believed in it, in a way. And you know that. You know you're working with somebody with, like, you know people are going to judge your project before they even see it.
I do think...
Not because of what your project have done, but just because of that. And I was like, you know what? We're going to do the best right thing we can do. Like, you just take that, in other words, you just look at the step you can do, right? And there was no better move we could do outside that at that time. And you realize that in life, nothing is completely good, nothing is completely bad. So even if Disney was at least by half of the US at least, right? They're not looking at it as favorably as it did before. Even if they don't hate it, it would be like they were definitely not looked at as favorably as they did before.
And
because of the political divide.
I have to say, I think that, you know, the compromises that you have to make, and when you look at the final product of what Iwaju is, and there were things I saw, you know, I watched Iwaju with a Nigerian friend of mine. Now, granted, I'm Cameroonian and we have very close, deep cultural ties to Nigeria and to all of West Africa, naturally. But I showed a Nigerian friend of mine Iwaju, and we saw animated Puff Puff for the first time in my life. And I didn't know I didn't know that my inner child needed animated Puff Puff. You know what I mean? But I think you guys' story, granted, best case scenario, you go out and you build this thing on your own, you're hyper successful, but there's the realities of the world around us, there's real constraints. And I think thinking about strategic partnerships, and you mentioned the people from Disney are incredible, right? So I think that's really, really great in terms of understanding that as Africans, we shouldn't be shy to go and look and make partnerships when it makes sense, and they can be beneficial for everyone and for our whole community, you know? But for now to really get into, you know, this partnership with Disney. I'm really curious to know, what are the production steps of creating an animated film with a partner like Disney versus on your own, from like ideation to final product?
Mm-hmm.
What would Iwaju have looked like if it was just you guys versus Iwaju with Disney support? And generally speaking, a production, what are the steps to? If today I have an idea, how do I then get it to being on Disney Plus?
Okay, so I'll go through the easy steps because the processes are it's almost like losing weight. Everybody knows how to do it. That's my wife trying to not be in the camera. Everybody everybody knows how to do it, but it's just hard to execute, and multiply that by a huge factor, right? So the steps are exactly the same. The same steps you do to make a 5-minute animation or 1-minute animation, the same thing. It's just certain areas expand, and obviously it gets more complicated, so there are more things that go wrong. That's the best way I can put it, right? So step one, if it's by ourselves, we don't need to make a contract to negotiate. With Disney, we had to negotiate for about almost a whole year, back and forth negotiations. I remember it was painful paying the lawyer at that time. He did his job well though. But yeah, so there's that negotiations phase of now, because it's a collaboration between two entities, right? They have their goals, we have our goals. And we are kind of like in a bit of a disadvantage because they are providing the income. So how do you negotiate when the other person is on holding the pass, right? There's a way where, because our main thing was, our main thing was to do this right. It wasn't to be like to do this the most profitable way. Our main thing was, how do we get this done right? And we make sure we put our foot down on that, because there's no way they can argue with us about that, because they say they wanted to do this right. So we have the leverage to push on all the handles on how to do this right. Oh, I see my internet is being funny there, but I'll continue, right? So that was the first negotiation step of doing it with Disney, is, okay, how do we make sure the contract ensures we do this justice and we do this right? So that's step one. Doing it ourselves, we know we're going to do it right. Step two, obviously, is now building the team. Much easier when you're working with people who have like experience working in the field longer than you've been alive. A lot of people we worked with have been there like longer than we've been alive. And you know what? You want to know another interesting bit of the story? But I've seen in some of the interviews. Marlon West, who is our VFX supervisor for Iwaju, worked on the original Lion King. So technically, if he spilled his coffee in that, I would have not even had an animation career. I would not have cared about animation. I'd probably be a visual artist somewhere, right? But not in animation. So imagine working with that, right? So you have that level of experience which you can rely on. In terms of, you can ask them questions about things. In other words, experience is like having somebody with a torch walking in the dark. That's all experience is, right? It's like you just have a torch in the dark. And it's very useful in the times where you get to a spot where you're looking under a bed or something. Flashing a torch there versus just using your eyes is a very different experience. Like something that would take you 2 years to learn, you learn it in literally one sentence somebody told you. Because he says a sentence and you can see it actually actualize, which is very different than when you go to somebody just for advice. Like if you ask me for advice, I can give you advice. That's very different than you ask me for advice. I give the advice. We do the advice together and you see the result. Very different experience, right? So there would miss that a lot. We would miss the experience Disney came in a significant amount. I don't know if it would have been as good as it was, just because we have to acknowledge that experience. And then the big elephant in the room. Where the hell, who is willing to give these 3 African boys millions of dollars to do an animation? You see where I'm coming from? That's the biggest elephant in the room. Now, because we have done Iwaju, people are willing to do that for us now. But even that is still a tall order, right? Still a tall order, right? Iwaju helps us a lot, but because that's a proof of concept. And again, here is where I thank Disney. They saw us and they believed in us enough that they made that bet with us. Now everybody else can come and make the bet after, because I've seen it worked out well for Disney, right? But that first step of giving us that amount of money, that's almost impossible. Like if you're just starting out and you think you're going to get the budget we got for Iwaju, the likelihood of that is very, very small. Now, this one I give my piece of advice of playing probabilities. And the way I say it is this. In crazy times, crazy things happen. Make sure you're there for them. Like today, nobody knows what the animation world is going to look like in 3 to 5 years. No one, not even film world. nobody knows because of AI, because of how everything is changing politically in the world. Like nobody actually knows what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And times like this is when the next giants of the industry are revealed.
Yeah.
You know the famous quote, right? The people with their feet most firm planted on the carpet fall the hardest when the rug is pulled from under them.
Yeah.
If you just have your toe there, they pull the rug, you just lift your toe, you put it back down.
Yeah.
But the people like Disney has been there for hundreds of years. The amount of money they're going to spend to have to adjust to the future is immense. Versus Kugali, which has been around for like 7 years, 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of money for us to adjust towards the future is very minimal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is a time to this is the time to be creative and try weird stuff. So we tried weird stuff with the Disney thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just happened to land in us in that way. So crazy things can happen. So if I say, even if I'm saying it's hard for them to invest in you that much amount of money,
Mm-hmm.
somebody's gonna get something crazier done in the next 2 years just because of the way the world is changing.
And as far as the Iwaju story itself, was that a story that existed before you guys partnered with them? Like, did you come in with an Iwaju story, or was that a partnership with them where you guys crafted?
In a way, yes, but not in its final formed way,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. So, Ziki, who is writer on this, so we're all creators, but Ziki is writer. Ziki always wanted to tell a story kind of reflecting the mainland and island in Lagos, Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big thing. And then also he had certain experiences from that end, which he wanted to reflect on, right? Mm-hmm. So there was already a semblance of a story that followed the themes of Iwaju, but it wasn't Iwaju that existed. Now, we do the collaboration with Disney. They asked us to, we agreed we're going to pitch them a few stuff. They were okay with it. We tried to do the pitch. We continued with that. They liked the story. So it was an original story that came out during the development of that.
Mm-hmm. And before I get into like specifically Iwaju, because there's so many themes, so many details that were embedded in Iwaju that I've watched it multiple times now. And every time I watch it, there's little things that I'll see over and over again. I'm like, wow. But before we get to that, I'm curious to know, is a 100% made in Africa possible in the animation world today? And if not, what are the key, there we go. So no, so what are the key gaps that we need to address as Africans before we can have a 100% made in Africa animation of that quality?
I would say, okay, I'll put it like this. In dream world, yes, like it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The same way it's possible for you to marry Beyonce tomorrow. I don't know if you're married or not.
I believe
it's possible for you to have Beyonce as a, right? It's possible to have a second wife as Beyonce. It's actually possible, right? But possibility is very low of all that happening. Everything needs to happen to align that is very low. So it's one of the things where I say no because of that, because it will need all the powerhouses on the continent to partner up. Now, there's been some studios in South Africa, especially, which have made full productions, like it's feature-length production. So if you look at Triggerfish would be one of the biggest ones, right? They're like the daddy of it in the continent right now. They have made some full productions, but if I ask anybody in the world, I always do this test. I do a lot of talks, and I walk around the world. I'm like, tell me 3 African stories. Most people in the world can't name 3 African stories. The best you get is like Black Panther, and you're like, that's not African. If they're older, they may say Shaka Zulu. If they are like an educated person, they'll say Kirikou.
Yeah.
But it's like nobody knows it. Nobody. Like it's one of the things. There are 3 things in terms of me doing my speaking engagements and walking around that has really made me, I don't know, like made me look at the world in a very different way. It's 2 things. That's one of them, where it's like nobody knows any African stories. That's literally 1. 2 is the way people look at Africans. Like, it's been sobering would be the word I would use. Like, pay attention to this. Go to any convention speaking about Africa, right? And especially of development and improving Africa. What you hear is the law of opportunities in Africa. The law of natural resources in Africa. You hear that, right? The only time you hear them speaking about Africans in the context of talking about African development is, the youngest population and highest number of population, that youngest population, right? Yeah. It's all very extractive.
Yeah.
And I've seen that over and over again, right? And it reflects with the world today. Because people complain about like Europe, they stole our gold, they stole our thing, then you give back the elements. But I see it happening today as well with like the film space and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I'll give you an example, right? This is something I've been reflecting on now. Obviously, I will not change things. But Iwaju is not possible without Disney.
Yeah.
It literally is not. But now think about the other side now, right? African storytelling history is directly tied to an American company now.
Yeah.
All the greatness of Iwaju still ties to an American company.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to look very similar to that thing of like, oh, they sold the mirror we gave them diamonds, they gave us a mirror. It gets close to that in some way, in some fashion, if you really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. I think though, like, at face value, you're absolutely right. That's the reality of things. But one, you cannot deny that to get to this stage, you do need the partnerships. And also Disney, when we think, especially with us and with the project that we have here, we want to really expand our understanding
diaspora and
the diaspora, the African community and whatnot. And even in the founding of Disney, I'm certain, I even saw on the Disney team in the documentary that you guys had that there's African Americans working them, the guy from Lion King as well, the original guy from Lion King as well. So we're there. Maybe on paper, the Disney, when it was registered, it's not a African company, certainly, but we're part of these stories, like, and we
I'd say yes, but my point is more on just the ability for it to exist. Because I agree on the partnership. Kugali are a very collaborative company, right? We that's always what we do. We think that's the way forward. Even in our beginning, there are 3 founders. It's not one person, right? We have 3 founders. And I looked for founders. I had a choice between starting my own thing and looking for somebody to do it together with. I went out looking for people, just because in my head it just made sense, right? That you cannot go by yourself. You have to go with a group of people.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, like just going just net of history, right? I always think about it because I always give it thought. Is until what point of time? Obviously, we're trying to speed that up more. Right now, people believe in us, which is good. That's a good thing in what you did is it sent a very hard signal. Like again, we're in an investment run right now. If you know any investors, holler at us. We're currently going to raise money. We're talking to people. And there are some investment firms which would have never batted an eye towards us that we're in talks in right now with. Just because we've shown it can be done. So that's a great thing from this, right? So I'm not saying Iwaju is lost. Iwaju is a net positive.
Absolutely.
But at the end of it, why does it take an outside company to show us our value? Why do we have to send our diamonds for a mirror before we notice they're diamonds?
Yeah. No, I hear you.
Many people have been trying to do this on the continent, and you barely get any support.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the mathematics of it. Fair enough. But just even people who can do it, like they often don't get enough support, right? Is that thing that it always bothered me. I've been talking to a lot of government people, and I always say this. I've always been telling them this, right? And if you don't value, because a lot of our creators are living in the continent, a lot of them, right? And if we don't show them the value they deserve, people go where they are valued, and it's very hard to stop somebody doing that. It's very hard to stop somebody who is struggling to cover their bills on the continent from going outside the continent and making, like, in 1 month, making the same amount of money they would have made in like 4 or 5 months.
Yeah. Or a year.
It's very hard to tell them no. It's very hard to tell them, hey, no, stay home because we need more artists at home. It's literally almost impossible for you to tell them that. I'll give an example. I know without a doubt, if I'm to stick in the Hollywood industry and work on 3 big films from a production designer or director level, and going back to the continent, let's say that takes me 10 years. When I come back to the continent, I'm a higher profile person than if I make 3 African films. Right? Like, I know that. And those are the things I'm trying to change right now, is because it's all a mental thing if you really think about it. It's not like a change physically needs to happen anywhere.
Yeah.
Like we've had the results to show it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And usually mental things change very quickly when money is around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's around where my head is at. I don't know how I ended up here, but conversation-wise, that's one thing I've always, like, at least of now, I'm very curious about is how to switch. Pretty much I'm calling it the Africans need a re-education about Africa, and the world needs a re-education about Africa. Mm-hmm. Those are two things I'm like, in terms of a lot of my talks, that's why we ended up here. I was talking about my talks.
Yeah.
Those are like, in terms of things, the way people look at Africans on the continent and outside the continent, it's really made me go, oof, we have work to do.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you, just because I think this is fitting. You're talking a lot about the future of the creative industry in Africa, particularly in animation and filmmaking. Question for you: what does Iwaju mean? Can you speak to that name in particular?
Iwaju is a mark. Okay, I'll go first philosophically, then I'll go literally. Actually, literally first, right? Mm-hmm. As the meaning of the word Iwaju, it comes from the Yoruba word. Usually, the future people say Ojo Iwaju. I cannot say it properly. Tolu will kill me for this. Ojo Iwaju, I think it's something like that. I've tried, right? Yeah. Which means the day ahead, the day in front, right? That's how the people say the future, right? Iwaju, we just shorten it down, just so Ojo Iwaju is gonna be hard to sell. That people can already fail to pronounce Iwaju, which I thought would be simpler. But that's the meaning of it, the word itself. That's where it comes from. And obviously, the story takes place in the future. So it's an animated story. Lagos takes about 100 years in the future. Follows a girl from the island with a rich dad, and then you have a guy from the mainland who's coming from a less privileged life upbringing. If anybody knows about Lagos, Nigeria, island is where most of the wealthy people are. Mainland is where like most of the working class people live, if I put it in that way. There's a very weird divide. And the interesting thing of how the story came about is usually in science fiction, we see things where the geography supports the division between the wealth and the people without the wealth. It's very rare you see that in real life, but in Lagos, Nigeria, it's actually there in real life where you have a water body literally separating the two areas. Yeah. So that's a very interesting thing. And it kind of explores the relationship between the different people in the show and how their situations lead them to where they are. And obviously, there's a bit of this kidnapping story happens in there, but it's done in a tasteful way where kids can watch it too. Let's put it that way.
And I think, one of the reoccurring themes that you guys did an incredible job of addressing was wealth inequality in Africa, right? And use Lagos, Nigeria as the example for that. And what discussions were you guys hoping to trigger with your audience with the way in which that theme was depicted? Because I was constantly, I was just like, wow, you guys really, and I think it's important for children to see that too as well, but what were you guys hoping to trigger in the audience with that story?
Well, that's the thing about telling an authentic story. You're not trying to trigger a discussion. You're trying to portray something in the truest fashion you can. Right? Because that's what authenticity is, right? Because there's some things you can't capture just by looking at it in real life. Like there's a reason art exists. Art tells things which you cannot say in words. Usually you can tell them in a story very, very well. Right? So, and Iwaju wanted to make sure to tell an authentic story to where we can capture the reality of like Lagos, right? Again, the wealth inequality was a big part of the themes we had in there, which was, and then there we have the adaptation, people adapting to their positions. Again, that's tied to the wealth, right? I wanted to tell that story very authentically. And naturally, if you tell that story very authentically, it brings up all the questions people should be talking about, because that's the real thing. That's the authenticity of it. That's the depth of it. Like, that's the point of it, right? It's not like something that happened yesterday. It's not something that you can see happening around commonly, but you could maybe feel it here and there from certain positions, and the art just expresses it in a way where it can come closer to your tongue. You ever tried to have a conversation with somebody about something, and you have this idea, it's not quite coming together, and then they say one word and it all clicks together? That's what Iwaju was.
And I think one of the best kind of scenarios that you guys used to depict some of these wealth inequality questions was, for me, what really got me was the airports, right? So the scene at the airport when they're coming out of the airport. And first of all, there's an analysis of the different characters in the airport. You see that the people at the airport are wealthy, they're traveling, they're connected to the outside world, so on and so forth. And when they leave the airport, you have the locals that have not had the opportunity to travel or that are coming and asking for money and whatnot. And that is something I've seen that in countless African countries. It's the same as an African. You see that and you know exactly what's going on. So I think those were, and there's countless other examples of this, but I think those were some of the things that I saw and I was like, it connected to me in a very, very profound way. And I think, question to you, what responsibility do you feel that the wealthy in Africa have towards the less fortunate?
This is a weird one. As you can tell with the Waju, we don't give you an answer per se in terms of do ABC, because we are not, again, we are very young. Some people tell me I'm wiser beyond my years, but I don't feel like it, if I'm being honest. But generally, if you tell me what the wealthy should do, I can tell you what I would do if I was wealthy and I want to do the best thing. So the best answer to that would be just people to have that in mind. Because it's very easy, as we said, again, the hedonic wheel, right? It's very easy for you to just go on this mundane routine of life and not do things that you would do. Like, I like to think of it as brain states. The different brain states you're inside where you do things differently. There's an experiment on this where the biggest reason between people giving money to somebody on the street and not, it wasn't the amount of money they had at the time. It was how much of a hurry they were in. Right? So it's just been the brain mode was on something completely different. And I think it's more of switching people's brain mode because most people actually care about other people. It's just really hard to actually make the changes you want to make. And as long as somebody is trying to make those changes in whichever way they see fit, I think that's a good first step. The second step is now to put some accountability to yourself to see whether those ways you're doing it are working. Yeah. So I'll use Tunde in the story as an example, right? His way was the other way, but there's the whole quote, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
Like, even if his goal was this way, if this did not happen, he don't have that time to reflect to see that he was on this path saying he's trying to get to that end, but he was never gonna get there technically.
Yeah.
He had to readjust the path a little bit because, again, he was looking down so much. He had to look up and scope the environment, as I call it, right? And as long as you're trying to do your best, because most people want to help people. As long as you're trying your best to help people, and then you evaluate the methods you're doing to help people, and you're satisfied with that, that's fine by me. I don't know what that is. I don't know how that is, but at least I can attest to those two things being true.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I think you're absolutely right. When watching Waju, you guys don't give you're not being prescriptive. You're being descriptive.
Yeah.
And I think it just forces us to have these reflections. And I hope that people that watch that go back home and like, wow, like this is the state of our society. It's futuristic, but it still has the very contemporary realities, structural challenges that we have, and forces us to reflect deeply about them. All right. One of the things that I've seen you say multiple times over is stories shape our society. Let's shape our stories. So now, how do you and your team at Kugali imagine the future of Africa and imagine stories shaping the future of Africa?
I think as long as we give, I'm going to change the words there, right? This is me falling into that same trap of wanting to be given things. As long as the creators of Africa get to tell stories authentically, I think we're in a good place, right? Because the moment for example, like with this story with Iwaju, right? If we tried to change the soul of Lagos, Nigeria, it would not land the way it landed. It would be a completely different thing, right? The thing that makes this particularly very special is how authentic it is to the place.
Yeah.
And stories like that give you a deeper understanding of the place. And the best way I can describe it is because we watch manga and anime. I use the example a lot. I hope this is not a PG-18 thing. But anyway,
Not at all.
when people are watching Japanese film or something like that, and they see somebody's castle is being run over, and the person takes out the sword, stabs themselves, nobody goes, "Oh, mental health." They're like, "Oh, yes, honor. He died with honor," because they understand the context of the story. So from a Japanese context, doing that is more from an honor thing. From a Western context, doing that is more from a mental health thing, maybe depression, life beat him kind of thing. All right? Now, because we don't have enough authentic African stories, people really don't know the versions of things for Africa. So if we have something, let's say if we had something like that in an African story, right, which was an African version of that, and we showed that to the world, the way people would look at it they will not be able to understand it because they don't have the story of it. They're going to contextualize it based off their story. So if you go to an African city and you look at somebody doing something, if you don't know anything about the cultures and norms of that place and actually understanding it from a deeper level, not from a factual level, from a story level, right? Because you know that whole thing, what's truer than the truth, the story. Knowing it from that level, if you cannot contextualize it from that level yourself, you're going to contextualize it based off your own experience.
Yeah.
And then you judge it being right and wrong based off your experience versus the culture context of that place.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And, one of the things that I love about you guys' story is that you are Ugandan and you worked on a Nigerian story with Iwaju. Know, I'd love for you to speak to the importance of inter-African collaboration and how we can foster more collaboration to tell our collective stories, right? Because it's, animation Africans, unfortunately, we don't get the average African does not get the opportunity, let alone to leave the continent, but to travel even within the continent. East Africans aren't necessarily in West Africa all the time, and vice versa. That isn't necessary, except Nigerians are everywhere, so we'll give Nigerians
I was gonna say
a little wing. Nigerians, they're a little bit different. But kind of tell us about, as being a Ugandan working on this Nigerian story, but also African story, and how you think about us working together to tell these stories so that we can see each other through art, right? An East African will now go and watch Iwaju and have some understanding of Lagos, Nigeria, but also see the similarities in the Nigerian experience that also reflect the reality, and vice versa. I don't know if you're familiar with Super Team 4. It's a Netflix animation story, right? So one of the things that I love about Super Team 4, which I also love about Iwaju, is how, unlike a Black Panther, which is this fairy tale space, you guys have committed to authentically representing Lagos, Nigeria, the same way that these guys at Netflix with Mama K's Team 4 have committed to authentically depicting Lusaka. And I grew up in Lusaka. Or I finished my high school in Lusaka. So for me, seeing that, I was like, wow, this means something to me. I can relate to this. And as a West African, seeing Iwaju and seeing how, Lagos was depicted, how you guys showed soya and soya being sold by this like Hausa man from the north, this Muslim man, like so perfect, right? So it allows us to travel. So can you speak to that as a Ugandan working on another African story, the importance of this exchange and what your experience was like doing that?
Oh yeah, I think it's very important to respect the project. The way I put it is, because we don't get many stories all from Africa with a certain budget, it's a very high temptation to squeeze all of Africa into one bottle. It's a very high temptation. Even when I was working on Iwaju, it was haunting me because I was like, I knew all my Ugandans were gonna come for me. They'll be like, bro, why is he not Uganda? Why are all the Ugandans in the story?
Yeah.
I've been in Lagos, not many Ugandans there, right? So it's that thing of being able to just respect the project and renew the fact that the more you add something inside a place it's not meant to be, it dilutes what the place is. So every single thing we added in there would dilute the Lagos experience. And we wanted to give strong to that. So it's a very strong thing of, again, you can't say you're going to tell an authentic story and then you start diluting it. So that's one. It's very hard to do. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to completely admit it's very hard to do. And then from the other end as well, growing up in Uganda, and I'm responsible for building the world of Iwaju. when we watched it in Lagos, Nigeria, Tolu and Ziki were saying, "Oh, it was amazing watching it." It made I was like the whole time. It was like I was taking an exam. I was just looking around, like, this guy is gonna, because they know if it messed up, they'll be like, "Ah, he was that Ugandan guy," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So visually, I had that in my head. So there's that bit of like you're trying to make sure you nailed it, right? Because you spend a lot of effort doing something. You want people to acknowledge that you did it right, and thank God they did. Some people are having a blast, right? Like little moments really caught people, and I was like, yes, that's what I wanted. So it's difficult in some areas, especially if there are few stories. That's an interesting thing. In a place where there are many stories, nobody cares. Like when I worked on Lion King, Dumbo, and the rest, nobody was coming like, why are we not working on a Uganda thing? Everybody was celebrating me on that. I worked on the Nigerian, people were like, bro, Uganda though, man. Just because it's close to home and there are very few of them.
I hear you.
So I do acknowledge that, right? And it's that thing of, again, every project works on, again, as a studio, just as Kugali, we make sure we have to do it and show it the respect it deserves. And you cannot dilute it. That you disrespect. Now, when we do a Ugandan one, same story.
Yeah.
We're going to show it the respect it deserves based on the region we're doing it in.
Yeah. And I think that's incredible. You know, like even my perspective on the African identity is that it is one that we're actively crafting. You know, like a Senegalese, Dakar is closer to New York City than it is to Cape Town. You know, so for a Wolof man in Senegal to feel close to a Khoisan man in South Africa, that is a project that we actively have to, you know, be very intentional in terms of how we work towards that. So I think what you guys are doing here, and it takes sacrifices. You have to be like, yo, first of all, the Nigerians are going to test me because I'm in charge of telling that story in a sense. And then the Ugandans are going to be upset with me, or the East Africans, because I'm not representing that. But, you know, we have time and we have to be patient with ourselves. And I'm certain that with Kugali, you guys are going to have other opportunities to tell even more African stories and diversify, you know. But I'm curious to know, what African false narratives are you hoping to address with your work with at Kugali, and what African stories are you most excited to tell?
There's two big ones really in terms of false narratives. One is Africans not having the ability to deliver. That's been a thing that's haunting us. Oh my goodness! Like most of the world will not trust giving Africa millions to deliver on a project.
Yeah.
They'll think money will get embezzled, it's corruption here, and then there, and then there, up, down. So at least we broke that one. That's one thing we broke with the Waju. The other one is just on the quality. One of the biggest things we had from people watching Iwaju is, I was watching this to support you guys, but this is actually good, you know? Like we had that so many times. People were like, we're just watching it just because, you know, it was African, but it's really a good thing. Exactly. That means people's expectations were lower. Like they weren't expecting it to be that good, right? So again, we broke that, right? We cannot be, they cannot be African quality. There's only one quality, it's world quality. It's quality or it's shit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a spectrum. Don't try and divide. Don't try into African, whatever. No. Quality. It's one spectrum. Good films, bad films, okay films. That's it. So hoping that broke that spell to put us into that same conversation with world-class films and etc. Things along those lines. At least attempt to be. Let me put it that way.
And, you know, one of the things that I think about quite a lot is, you know, visualization is a powerful tool for manifestation. You know, you have dream boards. My sister actually has a dream board in the studio here that kind of breaks down. Every year she'll sit down, set a few goals, and, you know, it's on the wall. And with visualization being a powerful tool for manifestation, with great power comes great responsibility. And with animation, I was having this discussion. I think you guys have a very unique, you know, opportunity to tell a story that has never been told before. Any other art form, whether if you're creating a film, if you're doing photography, you're limited by the real world that is in front of you. You know, you can't tell a story that's not there with the camera that you have necessarily. It's very challenging to do so. But with animation, you can sit down and imagine a world that isn't there and allow African children or children from across the world, adults from across the world to be able to see an Africa that might not yet exist, that you might be manifesting, right? So I'm curious to know, do you guys feel a sense of responsibility in how you animate a futuristic Africa? And how do you guys think about challenging the status quo and challenging the way in which we see things through animation with the amount of creativity that you guys are able to use?
I'll say that will be different artists, different writers do it differently. And different projects do it differently. So, for example, Iwaju, we're not trying to imagine the future of how we wish Lagos, Nigeria was. We're trying to capture the soul of what Lagos, Nigeria is, right? So that's the point of the project. Let's say if there's somebody else who they have a project which is like, let's say Mumujuju, one of our comic books, maybe made into an animation one day, right? That one is complete comedy, right? And that person just wants to make a fun story. And then on the other side, you have somebody like, let's say Morenga, which is much more of a deeper theme story, or Lake of Tears, actually. That's another one, right? Much deeper theme story among our catalog of IP, where it's addressing real life issues, right? So it's a different spectrum of things, and it just depends on the artist. And I think I would say the responsibility will not lay on the artist to tell things a certain way, because that's when you start playing around with the creativity and you start messing it about. Like if you actively, the amount of talent you will need to craft something, again, that should be a goal, not a thing, right? But I don't think most people understand the amount of talent you need to perfectly craft something to where it doesn't feel preachy, but it tells the story you need it to tell.
Yeah.
It's very hard, especially if it's a theme that's been spoken about a lot. It's very hard to craft that.
But
right? It's very, very hard.
I understand limiting the creative, but do you think that as Africans, I mean, we're talking about the gap in terms of the budgets that Western films have and our GDPs back home, and we have such a gap, not just in animation, but in a range of different as Africans that we have to catch up on, right? So with that in mind, do you feel that African creatives or just Africans in general have to be more intentional in terms of where we invest our time, how we think about our growth? And there's a balance, there's a fine line. You're absolutely right. We can't be too preachy. You have to let things organically take place. But how do you think about the orientation? Because even you have an orientation. You knew you had to work on an African story. So what's the orientation that you feel that we should still have?
But that's me, right? If, for example, you try to be me, it will not work out the way it works out for me. And if I try to be you, it will not work out the way it worked out for you. Because we're different people, right? Let's say if you're just a comedy writer, you like writing comedy, and then you try to tell a serious story, which one you don't like telling that kind of story, right? Number one. But people are like, no, because we hear this a lot, right? Actually, Hollywood is a very perfect example of this, right? There's a conversation that needs to be had. There's a chance that the fact that Hollywood has been trying to diversify the stories it tells is actually hurt diverse stories. There's an expectation right now. Really think about it. There's an expectation right now. Let's say, I'll give you an example. Doctor Who, there's a whole controversy right now with Doctor Who, right? People have not watched it. But just because they saw they switched the doctor to a black guy, they're like, this gotta be woke garbage. That's what they say. There's a direct expectation now. It doesn't matter if it was a cool idea. Like back in the day, you could do that. Like, perfect example is Avengers. Samuel L. Jackson's character. In the comics, is a white guy. But because of the political area we are right now with everything, in terms of storytelling, and how much of a push has been done in that way. Because I think the big mistake was, even if they are pushing towards trying to create more diverse characters and stories, if you don't do it right, consistently, like if it's a very lazy job consistently, people's perception become, characters, like movies with diverse characters are generally always lazy jobs. Let's say there were no African films. And then Hollywood decided to make 4 African films, and all 4 African films are subpar. The 5th film, people are going to expect it to be subpar even if it's made well. And I think because of the laziness in a lot of Hollywood's attempt to diversify their catalog of stories in terms of like DEI, because of how they have done it, there's a very high probability they have had like the next couple of projects coming from it. Like the trust, because trust has had to come back. And I think they've broken people's trust a couple of times. And because some of the things were just literally they just swapped the character. And every black person is like, there's a version of this which is black. Why are you not doing that one?
Yeah.
Right? So there's that conversation to be had there as well.
No, I hear you 1,000%. And it's not easy. And I think, over time, we're going to have more opportunities to play with it and have new creative projects come out that set a new tone in the space.
Exactly.
Now, we're approaching the end of the interview. We spent so much time here. You've given so many interesting insights. One, I'd like to know, are there any other African animation companies that you admire and that you'd like to shout out, actually?
A lot of companies, I don't know if the word admire would be the one I would use. And there's very few words, or there's very few things I use the word admire on. It's just me as a person, not a slight. It's more like even artists. If you ask me how many artists I admire, like in terms of the world right now, people who I admire is probably Cristiano Ronaldo would be the only one, maybe. Like I'm trying to think of who else, right? So it's a very different, again, for me personally, right? The people who I respect their art, the people who I think are absolutely tremendous, but admire is a very big word, for me at least. So studios that I respect and I really appreciate how they're doing the things. We have Creatures Animation from Uganda, Raymond, a friend of mine, spoken to him a couple of times. He's doing really, really good work. Triggerfish has made some very big leaps and bounds in the industry. So I like to give them a lot of the respect. Those are two last, at least, we had conversations with. There is Crossroads Animation in Uganda as well. I'm going to do mostly Ugandan ones here because I'm from Uganda. All right. There's Crossroads Animations as well. They're kind of like most people who end up doing animation in Uganda probably had their start somewhere in Crossroads in terms of they have a very good program for growing people. And then obviously there are people who are coming up doing different things right now as well by, say, specific animation studios. So I'd shout out those ones. So Creatures, Triggerfish, Crossroads. At least for today, those ones I'm shouting out.
And then we're entering...
They're just the close ones in my mind. Let's put it that way, by the way. It's not like they're the greatest, just the close ones to my mind. And they're doing amazing work.
No, we hear you. And we're getting into the plug talk section of this interview. So this is an opportunity for you to tell us about your latest projects you're working on, things our audience should know, how to contact you. If so, I remember you mentioning that you guys are going through capital raising at this stage. Maybe that's something you want to speak to, but anything else, please feel free to go ahead and speak to it.
Yeah. I'd say biggest way just to shortcut both of these. If you follow us on our social medias, so Kugali Media on almost everything. And I think Snapchat is kugali.ar if you're using a Snapchat. Aside that, everybody else is Kugali Media. We are much easier to find now after the whole Iwaju stuff, so that's good. So that's why to find us. To find me as a person, I'll be Hamid Ibrahim Portfolio. That's Instagram and then Hamid Ibrahim on LinkedIn. Those are two platforms there in terms of contacting me. Email to contact at kugali.com. You can find us on, actually, just go on the website, kugali.com. Much easier. KUGALI.com. And that's everything should be in a nice package for you there. So that's in terms of contacting. The projects we're working on, not much I can reveal. The biggest thing right now, we are currently trying to fundraise. As I said, you mentioned most of the issues I mentioned here all boil down to finance, if I'm being honest. Like the biggest thing, it's like change of thought process and then finance, right? It's a change of thought and finance. We're trying to raise money right now, quite a bit of money. If you know an investor, reach out to us. We're finalizing an investment deck. We're talking to a few people as well right now. So there's a few people interested. So it's a conversations going on. If you'd like to join a group of people investing, that's an open possibility as well with the people we're working with right now as well. So that's the best way I can put it. So reach out. Email wise, to me, I'll give my assistant's email. Easier to get to her. So it'll be admin@hamidibrahimportfolio.com would be the best way to reach out to me. And if you want to see what we're working on, our social medias are the easiest ways.
Perfect. And we always ask our Umoja questions to every single guest. for you, any advice, a proverb, a book, or music recommendation to African youth today, particularly to those that would like to follow your footsteps? What might be like a parting piece of advice that you'd like to share with them?
Okay, just because the industry is in a hard time right now, and I know it's going to change a lot. And when things are changing a lot, things are very unclear. I'll give you the best piece of advice which helped me in unclear times. All right? Two of them, actually. One of them was the best way to know the future is to create it. And right now, nobody knows what the future is. So that means it's down to us creating it. And you can't do the same old stuff. Like, you can't say, I'm making the future, but you're doing what you did yesterday. You're not making the future. You're in the past. So the world is changing. There has to be a change we do to match that. So that's one. And the second one is more, this advice came to me in a time when I was having a very difficult week. It was the most perfect advice in that time. And it's advice we have had before, but it's being said in a different way, which is pretty much when you find yourself in a storm, let's say it's a very difficult position and like overwhelmingly difficult position, right? And if you're trying to do anything extraordinary, you're going to find yourself in these positions more often than you think, right? Where you just feel like the whole world is just turned upside down, right? In a way. The best way to go through it is you look up just to plan. So you look up in the storm to see where you're going to go and what your plan is. Then you look down and all you focus on is taking the next step as perfectly as you can. So you're trying to plant that step down as best as you can and you keep your head down. And then you look up to plan again, look back down, step to plan again. Because if you try and walk in the storm and look up, you're going to fall down.
Hamid, listen, thank you so much. It really was an honor and such a pleasure to have this time with you. For our audience listening, please go ahead and follow Hamid. Reach out to them if you have any pieces or information for them. We really want to thank you all for this next and new episode of the projectumoja podcast. With that being said, once again, thank you, and we wish you all an incredible evening, day, morning, whenever you're listening to the podcast. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.